A lot of men think just being older makes them mature. It doesn't. Maturity is not automatic. It's not about age. It's about awareness, growth, and integration. And it's a journey that does take a lifetime. And here's the hard truth. Most men never take that journey. They stay stuck. Then they get defensive when women call them out and complain that masculinity is under attack. But if you're going to claim mature masculinity as the antidote to toxic masculinity, then you'd better be clear on what that maturity actually means and what it looks like. I'm Neil Beerbaum, and I'm about to show you the 4 stages of male maturity. Chances are you won't have seen them in exactly this form or this level of detail, and that's why you should stay. Consider these questions. When does a boy become a man? What really defines a man? What happens to men in midlife? And what, apart from age, qualifies a man to be seen as a wise elder? These aren't just philosophical questions. They reflect a crisis that many men are facing today. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to a model I've developed, adapted from the work of Robert Bly, Carl Jung, and my own 4 decades of personal exploration and coaching. And that's 4 decades as an adult, since I was 18. I'm 58. I've been around and I've been paying attention while on my own journey to integration and healing. This model outlines 4 stages of male maturity. Each fits within an age range, and each has a dominant theme or challenge, and each has been allocated a color. And if you're serious about becoming the kind of man who earns respect instead of demanding it, then you'll want to stay with me. So let's get into it. The 4 stages are as follows. The first stage covers the age range 16 to 25. The dominant theme is rebellion, and we'll give that the color red. Stage 2 happens from around age 26 until about 35. The dominant theme is compliance, and we'll give that the color white. The third stage starts to emerge at about age 36 and can run all the way to 55 and beyond. The dominant theme for this stage is integration, and we'll give that the color gray. Finally, we get the stage of wisdom, which we'll give the color black. This stage should start to emerge from age 56 onwards. However, not all men get to this stage. Many get stuck in gray, or even the earlier stages, white or red. And that's where the value of this model lies. I'm going to show you what that looks like when a man gets stuck at one of those earlier stages and doesn't make the transition successfully through the stages, and why that's a problem, both for yourself and for the people around you. In fact, I'd say that this is one of the great problems of our time. Nobody seems to want to grow up. We idealize youth and reject the counsel of elders. Many men seem to want to remain boys, and elders, well, they often don't act with the wisdom to deserve counsel. So let's go through those 4 stages in some more detail. Firstly, we'll look at the red stage, which is that stage of rebellion and is expected to occur around the ages of 16 to 25. If you've ever been a parent and tried to tell a teenage boy what to do, you'll know all about this stage. He'll deliberately do the opposite. This is fueled by testosterone plus other biological, neurological, archetypal, and behavioral forces. Mostly it's about his individual ego wanting to retain a sense of its own identity at the same time as it's being forced to give up that identity to become a useful member of society. In other words, he's resisting the inevitable call to go and work or historically enlist, say, as a soldier or a sailor. Because that's what we did historically with men in red. We sent them to work or to war. We couldn't contain all the red energy within the home, so we put it to work. We made it useful. We used it to make things, to move things, to hunt, fight, and protect, all of which was necessary when you lived in a village with wild animals and other men in red roaming beyond its fences. Other characteristics of the red stage are rudeness, arrogance, rebellious behavior, rowdiness, drunkenness. And we're talking historically, traditionally, more than today's generation. We'll get to that. And with that, we were generally happy for men in red to live outside the village too. We kept them away from the young women and girls. We didn't want our daughters to marry them while they still had too much red. Yet when they were home, we cut them some slack. We gave them their space. We allowed them to let off steam. As Robert Bly points out, there are no good or bad stages. What's important is to complete the stages. Men must stay in red for 10 or 15 years, says Bly. During that time, girls will make love with him but never marry such a man because he is still unfinished. He has no respect, the elders say. He is too red. These days, we don't allow much red. We have the view that all behavior is learned through modeling and conditioning. This red behavior must come from somewhere. Where? Oh, it must be the older men who themselves were once this way. Therefore, this red behavior must be unlearned. It must be conditioned out of our young men, perhaps by keeping them away from those older men. With that as our core assumption and belief, we don't allow our young men to express their red energy and thereby complete their red stage. However, if you believe people like Jung, that energy doesn't go away. It goes underground and comes out in other ways. It gets projected onto an enemy. The enemy in our modern world is woke thinking, that same woke thinking that suppresses the red energy. Hence, the angry young men who voted for Trump and search online for people like Andrew Tate, for which there were 7 million searches on YouTube in the month of April 2025, according to my reading of the stats. Twice as high as the next highest search, which was Jordan Peterson, and another search I noticed was for variations of the phrase reject modernity, embrace masculinity. More than 600,000 searches for that same month that I've just referred to. So could this be an attempt by young men to get their red energy back? I'm curious. I'm asking the question. What's more, if you listen to both Bly and Jung, men who don't get to spend their red energy carry it forward unresolved. They never fully grow up. And then we complain about those immature men in their 30s and 40s, and we wonder where our strong, mature leaders are. The good news for society, at least historically, was that those wild red men would eventually spend their red energy and calm down, perhaps even become tamed. This was driven by a number of forces. Firstly, they would have learned to manage their testosterone. Secondly, they've taken a few knocks and been put in their place. And thirdly, their desire to choose a woman and breed, start a family, would have kicked in. It would have been time for that. And when a man is ready for this, he moves to the next stage, which is our second stage, which we've given the color white and the theme for that as compliance, and the age range of 26 to 35. By the time men have reached their late 20s and 30s, especially historically, they would have learned a craft, completed their apprenticeship, and would be moving into positions of responsibility. Or they would have left the rank of soldier or sailor and moved into the rank of officer. In modern times, they'll be moving into their first management or leadership positions. They would also have tamed their red and absorbed some culture, usually driven by the need to woo women, and they would be ready and hopefully mature enough to marry and raise children. Now that shift in context from soldier to officer, from worker to manager, or from playboy to parent, has a profound effect on one's psyche. Anyone who has been through it will know that your whole perspective shifts. You find yourself representing the values, norms, and rules that you once rebelled against. Where once you were a worker agitating against the company, as a manager, you represent the company to the workers. Where once you were a revolutionary waving a flag from the rooftops, as a parent, you're calling for calm negotiation between the opposing sides. You might even find yourself becoming a bit of a crusader for stability and rules and social norms. After all, you're determined to bring your kids up right and make sure they live in a stable, organized society that can provide them the same or better than what you've received. You need your job in order to do that. And for all of the above, you need a stable society. So this stage has been symbolized mythologically by the color white. The most obvious and familiar symbol of this is the white knight. Here's Robert Bly on the subject. A white knight is gleaming and shining. We usually make fun of that, but a white knight is also engaged. He fights for the good, and he is no longer randomly rebellious. So we can say that white is a stage of complying with norms and rules and standards and enforcing those, whichever ones the man believes will be best for a stable society going forward. For some, that may mean taking a conservative view, for others, a liberal one. Either way, both will be out there believing that they are right and fighting for it, not in a violent red way, but in a white way, having intellectual arguments about things like constitutional principles or science-based studies. We see a lot of that today on both sides of what we call the left and the right. They're both white. They're both being white and being right, whether they are left or right. Importantly, Robert Bly said, without the red, no white. In other words, a man can't function properly in white by skipping red. Again, to quote Bly, we try these days to move young men by compulsory education directly from childhood into the white knight. And we could say that sometimes a mother wants her son to be in white when he is in red. An example of skipping red would be a man who never rebels against his parents, studies what he is expected to study, marries whom he is expected to marry, and works his way carefully and predictably up the corporate ladder, despite secretly wanting something else. And it's important to note that qualification I've just mentioned, some men might naturally follow the path that is expected of them and have no real inner need to rebel or do anything differently. They are simply steady men, and they are fortunate in many ways. It's the ones who secretly hate themselves for it or hate their lives, who have to hold themselves in place by suppressing a deep desire to rebel. Those are the ones who are the concern here. They will often appear to be the most white of all, meaning they'll compensate by being quite rigid in their approach to life, and they're insistent on things being done in the right way. It's their way of holding it all together and being done the right way, not only by themselves, but by their spouse, their children. So in that way, they could become even mini dictators or maxi dictators. Often these men will have the hardest time holding it all together in midlife. The cracks will start to show and things might fall apart. That's as inevitable as when you plant a tree surrounded by paving, say, and its roots eventually will burst through that paving. The flip side of skipping red is when a man gets stuck in red well into his 30s. A man like that might struggle to commit, either in relationship or in career. He'll tend to bounce between jobs or business ideas, always rebelling, giving up too easily, looking for the easy path, wanting to have fun. He might have children but will not change his lifestyle for them. There are a lot of men like this in our modern world that idealizes youth and discredits mature masculinity. Whether a man is productively in white, has skipped red to get to white, or is old enough to be in white but remains stuck in red, he will inevitably face this next stage, the stage of grey, which is the domain of the midlife transition, which may or may not manifest as a crisis. And the age range for that is 36 to 55. If you're finding value from this, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button. You're also invited to like, share, and comment. When a man goes through red and white that we've just mentioned, he's on an outward, expansive journey. He's not prone to much self-reflection. He achieves what he needs to pretty much by force, whether that be physical or mental force or simply life force in the form of one's will and drive. During all that time, he will employ an unconscious strategy that he believes works for him. For one man, that strategy might be literal force of character, like having that command and control style of leadership and doing things, very practical and hands-on. For another, their strategy might be generosity and putting others first. For another, diplomacy, or another might use their ability to see and think strategically further ahead than anyone else. For the most part, whatever strategy it is, it will go unquestioned, and it will get them somewhere. It will work. And they will credit the strategy for having gotten them to where they are. By those mid-30s. I got here because I did it this way or that way, they'll say, and then they'll tell everybody else that they should do the same. Copy me. However, at the same time, that same man will have been around long enough to have received feedback. Maybe performance reviews from his boss, from his colleagues, subordinates at the workplace via 360s or performance reviews, and from his wife and children, that his strategy doesn't always work. So maybe that command and control guy would have been told that sometimes he breaks people, or the helper will have suffered burnout and will have been told that he's never there for his family. The diplomat will have missed out on a few opportunities or let conflict erupt and get out of control because he was too quiet, too careful. Or the keen strategist might have found himself so far ahead of everyone that he makes no sense and can't get his plans implemented the way he wants, and so on. And each of those men's response can be one of two things. The first is to try to shut it all down, because to let in all that data might mean that he's been wrong all this time. So instead, he denies everything and goes harder at it. He does the same thing, only harder, faster, louder, insisting that he's right and everybody else must catch up. His wife and children despair. Maybe she leaves him or threatens to, or he leaves her saying she's unfairly critical and unjust and he can't go on like this. Either way, he starts again, this time with an even better wife. I'll show you all, he says. I'll prove how wrong you all are. That's the classic midlife crisis scenario, and it happens because of a refusal to move forward into grey, which is to accept and receive all the data that's coming in, and allow it into full view. So he'll either get stuck in white, which means being rigid in the way that I've just described, or he might go all the way back to red to try to start again. That's when he'll do all those things that he never did, when he should have, like play guitar or own a motorcycle. He might also do that if he skipped red, and sometimes he might do it to move successfully into grey. So don't be rigid in your interpretation of those things. These are all possibilities. One needs to really see what the intentions are. On the other hand, a man who moves successfully into grey will find himself opening up to the feedback and expanding his range of possibilities. And while that initially feels like defeat, do you mean I have to give up being that way? It will eventually be seen as an expansion. To use a Jungian term, he will begin to integrate his shadow side. All those things he could never be, too soft, if it's the command and control guy, or being selfish for that guy who's all about generosity, or being forthright for the diplomat, or being operational and grounded and getting things done for that strategic visionary. All of those will suddenly be allowed. New possibilities will open up, and he will find himself expanding to become a more integrated human being. Not all men take the path of integrating that shadow side. Many would rather not. It feels like loss and often entails more loss. There's great comfort in denial and blaming others. Some men build mansions there. After all, by opening up, a man might find that he took the wrong path, married the wrong woman, does not like some of his friends, and so on. To admit this can feel like a failure, and to deal with it might mean painful decisions and separations. Ironically, if he doesn't take the path, those same consequences might be forced on him. He becomes unbearable to live with and finds himself alone anyway. The bottom line is that grey is about loss, and to navigate grey successfully and reach the next stage, the stage of wisdom, a man must accept that his strategy is no longer enough. Instead of force, he needs to use more of the passive approaches like acceptance, surrender, listening, yielding. And while he might experience that as a loss, he will discover that at the end of the road, it is in fact an expansion. And that brings us to the fourth stage, the stage of wisdom, the color black, which we hope to see from around the age 56 onwards. And that's a very broad figure. And it's only when a man has integrated his shadow that he is ready to enter black, the stage of wisdom. As we've seen, this will mean dealing with and accepting loss, both external and internal loss. It will mean adding those passive elements to the active. In other words, being goal-directive and also accepting the paths not taken or accepting when things don't work out. It means being strict and also forgiving and understanding. He'll be able to draw on his own journey and use that as a reference for deciding when he has to pass sentence on someone, for example, or pardon them. And people will experience him, therefore, as having an expanded sense of self and an expanded range of possible responses and behaviors. He will therefore be less predictable and will make decisions that are not always easy to accept or understand, especially by men in white who are rule-bound. But most often, with time, the wisdom of those decisions will emerge. Robert Bly gives the example of Abraham Lincoln, who pardoned a soldier who had fallen asleep while on guard duty and was due to be executed by a firing squad. This was in response to a desperate plea by the soldier's mother. A man in white would have said, "No, we must stick to the rules, treat everybody the same, and do us right." However, Lincoln pardoned him, said, "Well, he won't be much use to us dead." Another example is Nelson Mandela, who allowed the sport of rugby in South Africa to maintain its springbok emblem, which was strongly associated with white Afrikaner authority. The team went on to win the Rugby World Cup in 1995, and that victory did a great deal to develop racial tolerance and unity in the country. It was a masterstroke by Mandela and would not have come about if he had not been in black, the stage of wisdom, if he had been fighting like the red soldier he had once been, or all about right and wrong as a man who was still a white knight would have been. It's clear that in today's politics we see too much white and not enough black. We can see then why Bly calls black the stage of humanity, of giving up blame, of wisdom, of humor in the face of adversity. A man in black is able to see that every person, including himself, has both good and bad within them. He becomes less judgmental. He develops a sense of humor around things that younger, less mature people take very seriously. He can tolerate ambiguity and will yield to the demands of the situation without losing his moral compass. The theme of loss continues in black. Eventually, a man must retire or hand over his business. We see many men struggle with that. Various studies have shown that mortality rates for men spike in the range of 2 to 5 years after retiring. Could it be that they can't handle the loss of status, or that there are no distractions anymore from having to face themselves? That's what we might expect from men who have not reached black. Some are stuck in grey, still not accepting any loss. In fact, if a man doesn't do the work in his 40s, when that first visitation comes around, the same questions will very likely resurface around 60, at which time he still has one chance to open up and begin the path of integration. If not, he will very likely harden and go into old age with bitterness, anger, and resentment. Some men reach retirement age and remain stuck in white, still fighting the good cause, crusading one-sidedly against perceived wrongs. RFK Jr. and Robert Reich are two examples. And I'm not talking about their policies or principles, I'm talking purely about their approach. Then you get some older men who are even stuck in red. You can see them, those men of 70 plus, speaking of expansion and war and conquering enemies. There are quite a few of those on the world stage at the moment. And you wonder, how did we become so woke and still end up with so much red and so little black in our leadership? Another question to ponder. So as a man ages further beyond retirement, he will lose his vigor, his health maybe, perhaps lose friends and peers, maybe a spouse, and very likely use up his money in many cases until he becomes dependent on others, until he himself must face the dissolution of the end of life. This is a great reckoning during which a man must face his choices and find his meaning. This will be made easier to the degree that he has successfully navigated these 4 stages of maturity. So there we have it, the 4 stages of maturity for men. If this is not scientific enough for you, please know that I'm not declaring this to be the absolute final truth on the matter. I'm offering it as a lens that is practical and meaningful. And that said, I'd be quite happy to subject this model to some academic rigor if somebody wants to partner with me on that. I'm totally up for it. Another point I'd like to stress is that my aim is to build a bridge of mutual understanding between the more traditional and more progressive views of sex and gender. I'm about a both and rather than an either or approach, not only in this, but in all matters. So while I agree that some gender roles are social constructs, I also believe it's still relevant to speak in terms of traditional gender norms. My commitment is to maintain a genuinely curious and conciliatory mindset. Finally, to give credit and acknowledge the sources for this model, I've adapted these 4 stages from the work of Robert Bly, author of I and John, and a major figure in the mythopoetic men's movement. He identified the 3 stages of red, white, and black. He based those on patterns drawn from ancient mythical tales, in particular the I and John myth. I've separated out grey from black to better reflect our modern lifestyle, where we live longer and more individualized lives. For those who know Jungian psychology, you'll recognize that the 4 stages can be mapped loosely to Carl Jung's 4 stages of the animus, which he described as the masculine aspect of the female psyche. Those stages for Jung were, firstly, the wholly physical man, his example there being Tarzan. The second stage for Jung was the romantic man, the poet Shelley being his example, or the man of action, where he provided the example of Ernest Hemingway. Jung gave the 3rd stage as being the bearer of the word, and his example there, the great British orator Lloyd George. In our day, we would probably look at, say, Barack Obama. Finally, for Jung, the 4th stage was the wise guide to spiritual truth, and his example there was Gandhi. So I'd like to hear your comments, what you think of the 4 stages of male maturity, and how you might apply it. I'll be referencing this model as I move forward with other material and going into each of those stages in depth. So I hope you'll join me on that journey. Thank you, and if you found value from that, please remember to subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.